In this tutorial series, we'll be going through MetaSounds node by node for the Unreal Engine, learning how to go from beginner to complicated in game-driven sounds and procedurally generated music.
In our tutorial series for MetaSounds, we've covered a lot about creating a MetaSound, manipulating that MetaSound, and how the input and outputs work. What we're going to do here is talk about an LFO. So earlier I mentioned you can generate chip oscillations and triangle, saw, sine waves, things like that. We're going to do a sine wave here, and we're going to output the audio to mono, and we're just going to hit play. You can see the sine wave. Now this is all covered in a previous tutorial. But if you wanted that to sound, have some sort of modulation to it, you could use another sound to modulate the sine wave. And a way you would typically do that is an LFO. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is an LFO, which is a low frequency oscillation. So all this is an oscillation, a back and forth that's happening at a certain shape, which is sine, and a certain frequency, which is, this is A, the note A, which is 440. So with an LFO, this is a low frequency oscillation. And so compared to 440, the number 5 is very, very low. You can change the shape of this because, again, this is the same thing, but it's optimized for very low frequencies. And you can see instead of outputting audio, it's actually outputting a float. These are more to manipulate things at a different level. So again, you can sync this where you can make it all start at the same time. That's what the sync node does. And you can change the other values of like what the minimum value is, the maximum value is, and the offset is. So the minimum value is just how low this will go when it oscillates. The maximum value is how high it will go. The phase offset is about where in the phase it will start. Will it start at 0 or will it start at whatever? And the pulse width is how much like how big of a pulse you're going to get with this LFO. And we can see the effects of this LFO, and let's go ahead and plug it in and you can just see what it looks like. Now, it's so low that it just sounds like electricity almost. You can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can count how fast it's going right there. So we're going to change the pulse width to something like 1. And you can see it goes up and down much more. And if we change the phase offset, it'll change exactly when it starts, which isn't something we can really tell from our chart here. You can do sine, square, saw, whatever as the shape. I'll just change it to triangle or to saw just to show you. Now with the shape, you're getting a much more sudden rise and a much more sudden cutoff with that sawtooth shape than you would in a triangle. You'll get a different rise and cutoff. But essentially the shape here, like this sine wave, it's the same kind of shape you're manipulating here. We can show you the sine wave to audio. You can see that smooth up and that smooth down. That's the kind of shape we're talking about. So with an LFO, common use for this, and we can use it for a ton of things, but a common way you're going to use it is to modulate something, to modulate sound. So because this modulates it, it kind of manipulates some real world distortions that can happen. So it will very gently raise and lower the pitch value of the frequency based off this LFO. Let's listen. So with it, it's a perfect sound. But when we modulate it, it dirties it up just a little bit. So like an ocarina in real life sounds has a very sine wave sound to it. very pure sound. This sounds much more like someone's blowing through an ocarina at kind of a pulse, like you can actually hear muscles pushing it almost. So we can up this frequency to something like 15, and we can create a bigger pulse width on it, something like 2. And you don't hear the dirtiness as much, right? If we go to something like 3, you can kind of hear it go whoa, 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 and warble some. So what we're doing here is we're introducing some warbling to a pure frequency. That is certainly not the only way you can use an LFO. There are all sorts of ways you can use it for timings, and anything that you can plug a float into, you can use the LFO for. But that is an introduction to the low frequency oscillation, or the LFO node in MetaSounds and the Unreal Engine.
This tutorial series is brought to you by my MetaSound Starter Pack. If you're looking for more complicated examples on how to utilize procedurally generated music and game-driven sounds inside of your projects, you might want to give it a look. More details in the description below. This is Space Dodo, where we talk about games and game development.